Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and welcome to this week's study of Pirkei Avot. Personally, I'm looking forward to the week that we study Pirkei Avot. But today, we're going to be studying Pirkei Avot, and as is our custom, we're going to start with the bracha, and we say before learning Torah. Shall we go?
Yes. Well, I can put it up. So, sorry.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
And there's something else that we say too?
On the top of page
On the top of page 235, if you happen to have this Siddur. Kol Yisrael yesh lachem chelek le'olam haba. All Jews have a portion in the world to come. Shene'amar v'yamech kulam tzadikim. The world is filled with righteous people. Le'olam yishu aretz. Neitzer matoi ma'aseh yado v'yispaer. I had the privilege when I was younger of studying in yeshiva for a few years. One of our teachers used to like to sing a song before we started to learn. I'm not going to sing the song for you, because after all, Shabbat is supposed to be a day of enjoyment. But I will tell you the words. It's a song in Yiddish, and it goes like this. Olam haba is a good result. The world to come is a good thing. Learning Torah is a better result. Studying Torah is a better thing. Varva vek yedaryach. Cast aside all your distractions. Learning Torah noch and noch. Let's study Torah on and on. The Olam Haba that we're talking about in this song is the world that will be after the arrival of Mashiach. After the Messiah comes, the world will be filled with peace. Not only peace among nations, peace among cultures, peace among races, peace among people with different sexual orientations, and peace within families. And we'll all be living the holy life that God intended for us to have. So if that's Olam Haba, how can sitting here in this room studying Torah be better than that? The answer to that question will be revealed in this week's study of Pirkei Avot. So, Varfa vek yedaryach. Let's get started with chapter 2.
May I interject a brief comment? As far as I can tell, for Rambam, how Olam Haba will look like a giant Beit Midrash, where we will all study Torah, close to God. So same activity, just a slightly different location.
So the second chapter of Pirkei Avot starts with the saying of somebody called Rabbi. Whenever you see the name Rabbi in the Mishnah, it refers to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, who lived in Yerushalayim in the 100s and 200s of the Common Era. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a giant of a scholar, but he is perhaps best known as being the editor of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was the recording of the oral Torah that we received in the desert. And it was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi who finally pulled all the little pieces of it together, and from that came the Mishnah. So Rabbi starts off saying this. Ezehu derech yishara. What is the proper path sheyabor lo adam that a person should choose to live their life? And he answers, Kol shehu tiferet leoseha. Whatever is glorious to the person who does it, the tiferet lo mina adam, and people will look upon him as being beautiful. Now, I translated the word tiferet to mean glorious because that's its plain meaning. But actually, there are many different ways of looking at this word. And it's an important word. It's the crux of what Rabbi is saying, because this is the way a person should live their lives. They should live their lives in a way that is somehow beneficial for them, and at the same time gives them a beneficial reputation in the eyes of others. So we're going to learn about two interpretations of the word Tiferet. The first comes from Rav Ovadia ben Avraham Bartanura. Bartanura was, maybe it still is, a town in Italy. And Rav Ovadia lived there in the 1400s. For some reason, he became known as the Bartanura. I don't know why. So this is how the Bartanura explains the word Tiferet. He writes, Sheyanoah, no, it should be pleasant for the person who is living. And people should have a pleasant experience from them. And the Bartanura gives an example. If you're very stingy with your money, that's very pleasant for you, but it's not very pleasant for the people around you. On the other hand, if you're overly generous and you hand out money left and right to whoever asks to the point where you have almost nothing left for you, you'll be very pleasant in the eyes of other people, but it's not going to be very pleasant for you. So you have to find a common ground, something that balances your own pleasure and the pleasure that other people have from you. Of course, another important teacher of the Mishnah was the Rambam. The Rambam explained the word Tiferet like this. He starts off, Derech hayishara haku olot hatovot, the proper path for a person, asher mehamalot umimatzot. It's in the middle, not too much to one side, not too much to the other side. Mitnei shebahem yekanei adam lenafsho tichuna chashuva. That will make that person praiseworthy. So to the Rambam, the word Tiferet is praiseworthy. You should conduct your life in a way that you feel praiseworthy and that other people will look upon you as someone who is praiseworthy. So I want to open this up now to discussion. Are there alternative interpretations of the word Tiferet? There must be many different standards that a person can think of or apply to live their life. And also, by whose standard do we determine what is Tiferet? It can be different in different communities. So how do we decide, and who gets to decide what is the proper way a person should live? Ideas?
Well, Steve, I just want to say, it amazes me how every translation has a different meaning for Tiferet. And in addition, even in our prayer book translation, the word is translated in two different ways in the same sentence. So after what you've said and increased my awareness, I feel more confused than ever about what to do with this word.
You know, this
Okay.
one,
Well, I would say if someone takes on the responsibility of teaching, that they also take on the responsibility of that definition.
certainly.
So their students may or may not agree, or perhaps the disagreement with the teacher, about that also serves the student. But I think that if you take on that responsibility, you have to define it.
I think the cop-out answer is Hashem makes the determination. And so you find out when you're at the door of Olam Haba. But I think this, brings up a point that that's actually a very contemporary problem. And when we think, for example, our recent escapades in Afghanistan, for example, who are we to determine how the Afghanis should live? And so when, I know that's taking it out of the context of Pirkei Avot, but in a way, it's still the same idea of we have to think about who makes these determinations.
Interesting thing about this quote is that it appears to give equal weight to finding honor in God's eyes and finding honor in other people's eyes.
Yeah. Should they be equally important? You know, one of the ways, that was nothing, just a noise.
A trouble. Hashem.
Uh-oh. One of the ways that we are asked to live our lives is something called Kiddush Hashem. That our action should be something that shows other people that God is holy. So for example, if you're somebody who wears a kippah every day, and people in the shopping center see you helping an older couple to bring their groceries to their car, they might say, this is what a Jewish person is. And by that, you are bringing glory not only to yourself, but you're bringing glory to God. And that's called living al Kiddush Hashem.
In Israel, every Yom Ha'atzmaut, they light with torches. And they select people really exemplify the state. Or this year they chose special ed and they chose 12 people. And the last sentence, so each one reads something why was no, it tells it the honor of the group he works for or is. But the last sentence is לתפארת מדינת ישראל. And since I was small there, I mean, I don't even this year I couldn't miss the lighting of the torches. But when we get to תפארת מדינת ישראל, no matter how many times I hear it, I feel pride. I feel I look what Israel accomplished. It's a term that really encompasses many things.
All right, maybe we should move on because there's a lot to cover today.
Can I just, one more brief,
Oh, please.
you were talking before about balance. It strikes me that by balancing other people's views of you and God's views, it could help you focus your service of God in a way that is just between you and God, that it's removed from other people.
That's very special.
The way Haredim separate themselves from society and concentrate on the relationship with God. And but this also says you have to be a part of society, and what they think of you also matters. You need to be involved with them too. So I think it's a way of keeping you from becoming too absorbed in one particular way of serving God.
That's really nice. You know, we believe that God takes a personal interest in each and every person. We call that in Hebrew hashgacha pratit. So if you ever feel that God is not in your life, where's God today? God is said to take a personal interest in each and every one of us. I'd like to go on to something else that Rabbi Yehuda Nassim said. He said, "Beheve zachir b'mitzvah kala kevachamura," that you should be as careful to give your full effort to a mitzvah that's easy to perform as you would for a mitzvah that's difficult to perform. And you know, the same could be true of what we call gimilut chasadim. God gave the Jewish people two charges. One of them was to perform the mitzvot. Another one was to do gimilut chasadim. Those are acts of kindness. That's helping somebody who needs help. If somebody's sick, bringing them medicine. If somebody's poor, helping them buy groceries. And it doesn't only apply to people, it also applies to the world. If you're helping to clean up a polluted river, that's a gemilat chesed. If you see somebody who's being discriminated against and you fight for their rights, that's gemilat chesed just as much. And we know that some, whether they're mitzvot or gemilut chesedim, some of those acts are easy to perform. And others are very, very difficult to perform. Tonight we'll count the Omer. One bracha, say the number, and you're done. But think of all the effort that goes into preparing for a Passover Seder. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is saying that we should be as careful and as attentive and do our best for a mitzvah or a gemilat chesed that is easy to do as one that's difficult to do. And the reason he gives is she'eina tayotea matan schar shel mitzvot, because you don't know what the reward is for doing this. Now, I use the word reward for schar because that's its literal translation. But schar is not like, it's not like what you get when you find the afikomen. Schar means more like the value or the consequence. You don't realize the full value of the mitzvot that you do and the consequences that they have on the world. You know, if you say a nice word to someone who looks like they can really use a nice word, you don't realize the full effect that that can have on a person. It could change their whole day. It could change their whole life. And it's easier to see with a gemilat chesed. You know, when you donate your hair to Locks of Love, the benefit of what you've done is readily apparent. But when you put on tefillin, how can you see what the benefit is? That part of it is hidden to us. And Rabbi is saying that we don't know the full value and the full consequence of what we do. So everything that we do, we should give it our best and give it our all. So I would like to, again, open this up for discussion. What value or what consequence do you see in performing gemilut chasadim or mitzvot? And have you ever had an experience, maybe a personal experience, of something that you did, that you realized the value for it and what it meant to you and to the world?
When I think of minor mitzvah and major ones, I'm remembering something that the Bar Mitzvah said today about chok. The ones that strike me as most challenging are the ones that fall under the head of chok, where when it comes to helping helpless people, feeding the hungry, honoring parents, all those are easy to understand. Shabnez is kind of a challenge. Why should I care? What does it matter? And what difference does it make if I don't pay attention to it? I think this is why Rabbi Yehuda has made a point of saying this, because otherwise it would just be too easy to disregard those kind of mitzvot and treat them as just anachronisms. Is there value in performing them? You know, I keep kosher, and I do it because I think it, in an indirect way, it helps me be a good person because it makes me mindful of what I'm doing. And yet, my mind still rebels against certain certain mitzvot, which seem to me so utterly, seem to me utterly pointless while I'm doing them.
I took it a little bit. I agree. I agree with everything you said. When I first heard the question, I was looking more for those things that one can do easily versus that take more effort. And it reminds me of as you develop skills, in this case, life skills, but other kinds of skills, that sometimes when something is easy, you don't give it the attention. And that is actually the time when it can be the most problem. Because you believe it is easy and you believe it is accessible and you don't give it the mindfulness. And it, to use your value comment, it reduces in value. Because you can, you could do it incorrectly or or create some harm or not create the good that you were hoping to, because it's easy, so you don't give it attention. So another nuance.
Mhm. There is a mystical Hasidic idea about the mitzvot. We say that the mitzvot are comparable to dew. The dew on the ground rises into the air, goes into the clouds, and flies off who knows how many miles away, and eventually gives rain where rain is needed. So we don't really understand this, but apparently the mitzvot have an effect on our world as much as something that we do with our own hands. It's just beyond our capacity to understand.
Well, my father, as far as I'm from, was not very big on organized religion. And keeping kosher was not exactly something he aspired to in any way, shape, or form. And after my mother passed, he and I had a conversation. And I explained why I kept kosher, because the comment that inspired this, but anyhow. And I told him I keep kosher because it makes me think about what I'm doing. And I said, the day I do it by rote is the day I stop.
Yeah.
And after that, although my father had very little respect for other family members who kept kosher, but when we would go out to eat, would eat whatever. And when I go out to eat, I'll eat fish, but, or vegetarian, but, and my father never once gave me a routine. And, it was something that he could respect. And then on the Milut Chasadim, I had a very, this has happened to me more than once, and I don't understand it. I read to Hashem. There have been times pre-COVID when I've been out without wearing a mask, and just happened to smile at a stranger, and the person has transformed me from a mask.
Yeah.
And I just, I don't know where that's from. And
I can give an example of an act of kindness that I did many, many years ago. I had a friend named Sam, and he lived out in Western Canada. And one day he had to go back home to see his family and didn't have money for airfare. There's no chance that he could afford it. So I said to him, no, I'll pay for your airfare. And then when you're able, you'll pay me back. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it for you. And I remember the feeling that I had when I saw him go down and get on that plane. Sam benefited. He got an air ticket to go back home, but I was on such a high because I was able to, and I didn't save the world, but just by doing this simple act, I was on such a high. I felt fabulous for days. That's what doing acts of kindness can do for you.
that you may have saved the world.
And they have, yeah, who knows? Who knows? We don't know what the full value of our actions is.
Steve, we've had a small, well, not small, an important request because people are using different texts.
Right.
That as you approach a piece, if you would just say, we're in chapter 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
whatever.
Yes, we're in chapter 2. at the very beginning.
Yeah.
The very, very start.
I'm recalling a conversation I once had with a modern Orthodox man. I asked him, why, when I go to the butchery, I'm seeing dairy products labeled Chalav Yisrael, or bread labeled Pak Yisrael, which I assume meant no Gentile hands were involved in the process. I thought, where did this come from all of a sudden? This was never a thing before. His answer was, keeping kosher became too easy. So the rabbis have found ways to make it more difficult again.
Okay. Learn and Torah noch and noch. This is the third thing that Rabbi says. Heye mechashev chetzad mitzvah neged schara. Consider the cost of a mitzvah, not in dollars, but in the larger sense. Consider and compare the cost of doing a mitzvah against the reward that you receive, its value, right? Uschar avera, and consider the reward that you receive from committing a sin against what it's going to cost you ultimately. I know a story about this that I have been waiting decades to tell, and finally I have an opportunity. This is a story about a chassid who likes to go to the mikvah before Shabbat on Friday afternoon. Many chassidim do this. It gives them a feeling of entering Shabbat in a mind state of holiness. So this particular chassid went to the mikvah on Friday night, and as he dipped his foot into the water, he realized the water was very hot. And he said, oi, 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 so hot, I can't do this. But you know Hasidim and their customs. So he kept on going into the water, deeper and deeper. And after a while, when he became accustomed to the water, it was actually very enjoyable. He said, this is wonderful. So that night at the synagogue, after services were over, gathered his friends together and he said, gentlemen, today I learned a tremendous lesson on the difference between a mitzvah and an avera, a sin. With a mitzvah, in the beginning, you might say, oi, 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 but in the end, you'll say, this is wonderful. With an avera, in the beginning, you'll say, oh, this is wonderful, but in the end, you're going to say, oi, oi, oi.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
We said earlier, well, I said earlier about that line in the song, learning Torah is a Beser Avot. How can studying Torah be better than the world to come? Let's face it, Torah study is hard. First, you have the language barrier. Then you have to work your way through so many complicated concepts and ideas that are very unfamiliar to us and difficult to grasp. But when you finally get it, when the dawn finally rises over Marblehead Bay, there is an elation. Finally, a little piece of the universe makes sense to you, and you feel so much closer to God because you had to work for it. In Olam Haba, you don't have to work for it. Everything is already set up the way God wants it to be. It's a little bit like winning the lottery. Sure, it's wonderful, but it doesn't mean as much because you didn't have to work for it. You don't have that feeling of satisfaction and pleasure and achievement. So that's why studying Torah is even better than Olam Haba.
Well, the concept of Olam Haba is not very useful today. Since I'm agnostic, I can't make judgments about how to behave based on some paradise that I will be living in after I'm dead. So the emphasis on Olam Haba in when it comes up here, I find I have to find ways to work around it. Because otherwise I have to find value, I have to find intrinsic value in what they're saying. Because this reward punishment system does nothing for me. Just the same as when I read the Shema, the reward and punishment aspect of it is lost on me. Do other people feel this way?
Yes. I have to say, I think that, I think of the rabbis, the time of the Mishnah as an extraordinary group and referencing the earlier stages. I think the value of the wisdom that they bring is worth engaging. But I think that their response to the reality of the world not matching reward and punishment was to say, then we will have another world, and that's when things will be as they should. So I think it was a very, forgive me, I think it's a human construct to allow the discussion of reward and punishment, because it doesn't play out in the real world. That's my thought.
That sounds right. But understanding that doesn't help. Doesn't help us, reading it today.
Well, maybe the reward is the inner.
It's going to have to be.
I was actually going to say something and was sort of trying to think better of it. Because this whole idea of why studying Torah is better than the world to come makes me wonder if the worlds to come will ever come. Because if everything is set up and so easy in the world to come, where do we find any real satisfaction from studying? So if, as I forget who said it, I'm sorry, according to Rambam, the world to come is this wonderful yeshiva with Hashem as the Rosh Yeshiva, and we're all studying. Would there be any real discussion or arguments because we're in Olam Haba? That would be sort of antithetical to that. And if so, I mean, there would almost be a pointlessness to it, to studying Torah in Olam Haba. So I'm wondering if, yes, it is, the Olam Haba is definitely a human construct, but I'm not sure it's ever achievable.
Well, I recall Yeshayahu
And I'm
Leibovitz.
worried that God's going to straighten it out.
I guarantee you won't. Yeah,
If you don't believe it exists, or she exists.
well, I don't
Well,
believe,
he didn't say
I
that.
don't believe
He
that
didn't say
he doesn't exist. I just have no opinion.
And not.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, but it's not, agnostic doesn't say that there isn't a God, but it also doesn't say that there is.
It means I have no opinion on the subject, that finding that I'm not searching for, and I don't need an answer to the question of God. But I do recall Yeshayahu Leibovitz being asked if he believed in the coming of the Messiah. And he said, yes, I believe he will always be coming.
Exactly, and I think that's a really, I think that's what we're striving for. Is, yes, we want the Mashiach to come. And so we work and I think that's what our Parsha today is about in a way. We will be a holy people. to try to make that happen, but
it's always an aspiration.
let's be honest, we're a very small percent of the population of the world.
It's like Tevye says in Fiddler on the Roof, we'll just have to wait for him somewhere else. I once asked one of my teachers in yeshiva, how will we know when Olam Haba is imminent? What are the signs that I should look for? And he said, nobody will ever know. But after we're in Olam Haba and we look back on history, then we'll say, now I understand why this happened this way and that happened that way. Before you won't know, but after you'll be able to see how it all came together. I'd like to tell a quick story about a mitzvah that was difficult to do and turned out to be very, very nice. This is the story of my first sukkah that I actually built for myself. Nowadays, you go online and you buy a sukkah and it shows up and it's all beautiful and you follow the instructions and my wife puts it up in half an hour and you said, it's beautiful. It wasn't like that when I was younger.
Does part A fit into part B?
It does. It does very well, actually. And you can take it apart just as easily. So I didn't have this for my first sukkah. I had to scrounge around. I used pegboard for the walls. And I didn't have metal poles for the corner. I found whatever piece of metal I could find. And the whole thing was held together with string, literally with string, with cotton twine. And I remember putting up, and it was a dreary day. It was drizzly too. And when I was finally done, and I stepped back and I look at this thing, and it was such a contraption. I was so embarrassed by it. But that night, when I was sitting in my very own sukkah that I built and having supper, to me, it felt like a castle. There was no castle more beautiful than that.
Do you have a picture of it?
No, it's a good thing. Because very often as you grow older, the memories are better than what it really was. So I prefer to remember it like that.
Well, I guess you can make the case that the prefab sukkot are not really consistent with what a sukkah is supposed to be.
Well, it certainly wasn't like that in the desert. No, if they had sukkot like that in the desert, I'll say there would be a lot less complaining. Or
Would you call that Rube Goldberg's sukkah?
could be Rube Goldberg's sukkah very much. Of course, if it wasn't a sukkah, you know how we were in the desert, you just would have found something else to complain about. All right, we are beginning to get a little bit short on time, and there's one more saying of Robbie that I want to get to, and I don't think there's going to be time to really discuss it a lot, but let's give it a try.
Okay, and the reference?
This is again in chapter 2. This is the very first paragraph, and it's the last line on the very first paragraph. What
Okay.
page is it in this?
238.
That's fine. If
So-
but others have other books, so
Okay. So it's like the Seder.
Yes,
It's a
exactly.
different page for you,
Just-
a different page for me.
yes, just need to
Okay.
know which
All right.
verse, so. I'll
I'm
do
on page 4. So Rebbe says, Histakel b'shlosha dvarim ve'iyata ba lidei avera. If you keep in mind these 3 things, you won't come to commit sins. Number 1, da ma lemala mincha. Know what is above you. Know who is above you. It's not only God, it's not only the angels, it's your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents, your whole family. You are not by yourself. You are part of a huge chain, and they are all looking down on you. And then he says, Ayin ro'ah ve'ozen shomat. Be careful what your eyes see and what your ears hear. I remember when our son was growing up and we tried to filter the internet, for him, and I explained to him, there are some things that once you see, you can't unsee them. There are things that I hope you never have to see, because once you see them, you can't unsee them. And it also means that, we have a choice to make. We can choose what to watch, and we can choose what to hear. So we should exercise discretion and good judgment in what we see and what we hear, so that we won't be tempted to commit sins. And the very last thing that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says in this Mishnah is to know v'chol ma'asav b'secher nichtavim, that everything that you do, all your actions, are recorded in a book. Recorded in a book. What book is this, and how are they recorded?
That goes back to Yom Kippur.
Sounds like Santa's naughty and nice list.
Yes.
Actually, I read the passage slightly different.
Okay.
That was a little bit more in keeping with the translation they have here. Keep in mind what is above here. They have a colon here.
Mhm.
An eye that sees, an ear that hears, and a book in which your deeds are recorded. In other words, you're not acting in a vacuum. People are seeing what you're doing. They're hearing what you're saying. And what you do and say is part of what will become history. Even if you're a nobody, even if you aren't like, a president or a rabbi or, a teacher or anything, if you're just like somebody who is not someone whose opinion people would normally listen to. People are hearing the words you're saying. They're watching what you're doing. And it affects your children, it affects the people around you. And sometimes the repercussions can be felt all the way across the other side of the world and through the generations.
That is a great interpretation. I love that. Because it's instead of just being an omniscient viewer, it's the whole world is watching.
Well, they say if you save one life, you save the whole world. It's the same kind of thing. It's if you do one good deed, you can affect good deeds throughout the world. If you do one Avera, people will see that too. And it can affect what other people are doing. If people see that you're doing something that one more person joins you and then another, and then it becomes normal. It becomes okay to do it. And then it spreads. And same thing with the mitzvah. People see you doing special things, they want to do special too, like the smile that you give people.
Also, you can do the perfect person to do everything right. Everybody admire you, and then you do one thing, and what people remember is on you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It lights
Interesting.
you off.
When I first encountered this and the hearing and the seeing, for me, it was more about actually seeing what is and actually hearing what is being said or what is being put out there, to both see and listen with intent and understanding rather than the surface of things. And one of the things I love about what you're saying and reinforcing how negative deeds then become normal, I think that some of the terrible things that are going on in this country right now that are not from different people. These are the same people that have always lived here. I think that one of the things that has happened is that certain things have become normalized that were kept tamped down earlier for that very, that some society norms, our societal norms have gotten crazy.
Yeah.
And and destructive.
And
So,
I think that goes back to that first portion of it, the very beginning of the passages, the idea that, and you said, I'm trying to find it now, the bringing honor to one's maker as well as respect to it from one's fellow human being, it's all, it's all interconnected. And people need to not just do, that was what you had said, that people could do things that feel right to them, but it also has to feel right to the people around them.
Yeah. All right, I think we're just about done.
what is this? Yeah, okay.
Those of you viewing at home, you can't see, we're in the boardroom here, so I can see the view out onto the street. And the streets are just packed with people. And there's WBZ over there. And so it's really, I'm glad that this has been so successful to everybody.
I'm glad that's such a good organization.
Well,
There's a good sense of humor in the room.
so we have a Mishnah that we end off with, right?
Yes, let me see if I can get this up.
262.
Yes, or if you have,
If you have the Maxwell house.
yeah,
It's after 6,
sorry.
6:11.
Yes,
Yes.
it's at the end, of the last chapter, or 26, Anyway, it's also shared on the screen, so.
Yeah, this is a passage it started off originally, it was said, after you learn from the part of the Talmud that's called the Gadata, the philosophical, mystical part of the Talmud. But now it's said very, very commonly, I think it's a good saying. It's a saying of Rabbi Hanania ben Akashia. And he says, Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lizakot et Yisrael. God wanted to give the Jewish people lots of opportunities to excel and to succeed. And how did God do this? Therefore, here Balahem Torah v'mitzvot. God gave the Jewish people an extra portion of Torah and mitzvot so that we would have many opportunities to succeed as a people and to excel and to live the life that God wishes us to live. And how do we know this? This comes from a quotation from Yeshayahu that God says, Adonai, or God doesn't say, Yeshayahu says, Adonai chafetz laman sitko, that God wanted in order for his righteousness, Yadil Torah, Adonai chafetz laman sitko, Yadil Torah v'yadir. God wanted the Torah to expand and become beautiful. It was great to see everybody today.
Great.
I'm so glad we did this. It was so much fun.
Steve, thank you so much. Wonderful
Steve.
teaching.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you in person finally. And this is Roberta. And thank you.
And I'm looking forward to the other chapters in the Pirkei Avot series. Next week at the same time, 12:45, as we said when I was growing up, same bad time, same bad channel.
What is it? Anyway,
Yes,
thank.
where I will,
everyone.
I will try to approximate the great job.
And thank you, Roberta, and thank you for helping. Thank everybody who came by. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.